dignitaries, guests of the day, HOIs of various departments, faculty members, and my dear audience. I, Shreya Pathak, along with my co-host Pratyasha Paul from BA Honours English 5th semester are here to welcome you to the 7th day of the 30-hour workshop on the topic Legacy of Indian Knowledge System and its role and scope in teaching English. In yesterday's session, ma'am spoke about how folk art becomes instrumental in storytelling. She discussed various forms of folk art and their origin.
Moving further, with great honor and respect, I would like to introduce our Honorable Director of Amity School of Languages, Professor Dr. Kumkum Ray. Her constant support and guidance have been instrumental in shaping the success of our institution. Now, I'd like to invite ma'am to grace us with her words.
So बहुत pranam and welcome Dr. Sourav Banerjee. We are grateful to you for having spared your precious time for us. And without taking more time, I would request my students to please jot down the points that Dr. Sourav Banerjee shares with us so that your time spent is more meaningful. So welcome, Dr. Sourav Banerjee, and you are a precious speaker today because your perspective, I'm sure, will give the students a new and throw a new light on the topic discussed as far as yesterday. Thank you so much.
Give us a moment to introduce you, please. Pratyasha, please continue.
Yes, ma'am. Now, I'd like to invite our speaker of the day, Dr. Sourav Banerjee. Sir is an associate professor and the head of the Department of English at a government-sponsored college affiliated with the University of Calcutta. With over 20 years of teaching experience, he holds a PhD on cultural nationalism in the novels of Australian author David Ross. Dr. Banerjee is an education ambassador for the International Organization of Educators and Researchers, Inc., and serves on several editorial and advisory boards. He has published numerous papers and is writing a book on David Malloy. He has delivered keynote speeches, lectures internationally, and his research includes Australian literature, post-colonialism, and post-humanism. Dr. Banerjee believes in education as a means to train the mind for better thinking and keener perception. Sir will enlighten us on the topic Legacy of IKS and its role and scope in teaching English.
Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So let me begin. A very good afternoon to one and all. And Pratyasha, thank you for that kind introduction. And first of all, I would like to congratulate Amity University, Lucknow for organizing this 30 hours workshop on Indian Knowledge System, NEP 2020. It was the need of the hour, and I'm sure many people will benefit from it immensely. And thanks also for inviting me to be a speaker here today. So from what I've just heard, that yesterday's speaker had talked about folk art and storytelling, and how folk art can be used in storytelling. And I mean, I've not heard the talk, so I don't know what the perspective is or was, but I'm very sure that it was not only illuminating, but it was on a particular topic. But today, I'm going to do something very different, maybe from yesterday. What I'm trying to do is I'm to try to look at the whole of it. So as you have seen, the title of my talk. Can somebody please share my slides? That would be very helpful.
Yes, sir, we are sharing it.
Yes, sir.
Disha, please start sharing.
So the title, not this one, the first one, please. So the title of my talk today is Legacy of IPS, that's Indian Knowledge System, and its role and scope in teaching English. So is the okay, fine. Let's leave it at that. Don't you have the title slide? You have the title first slide.
Yes, sir. Just give us a moment, please.
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Yeah. So thank you. So I have actually structured my talk today into three parts. So in the first part, I will focus on the rich legacy of the traditional knowledge system in general and the Indian knowledge system in particular, and its post fall from grace, so as to say. In the second part, I will concentrate on the measures taken by the Honorable Government of India in reviving and promoting the lost glory of the Indian knowledge system. And in my third and final part, I will try and show uh, the role and scope of the Indian knowledge system in teaching a subject like even English in the Indian classrooms. So let me get straight to the point, and I will begin with a quote from Albert Einstein. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Albert Einstein, who had said, and I quote, can we have the next slide, please?
Ayushi, please start the next slide.
Yeah. So, and I quote, he said, Albert Einstein said, we owe a lot to the ancient Indians, teaching us how to count, without which most modern scientific discoveries would have been impossible. Now, this acknowledgement coming from Einstein shows how glorious our past was. But let us start today's session by accepting the fact that our present education system is not one of the best in the world right now. If we do not identify and accept our problems, we'll never be able to solve them. So let us start by accepting them. We did have a glorious past. And even in the present, our wealth of knowledge stemming from our old and glorious culture is enviable and beyond compare. But the Westerners tend to castigate it as quote unquote primitive and are thus irreverential about it. But it is now well established that Western criteria are not the only benchmarks by which other cultural knowledge should be evaluated. So while the term traditional within quotes does sometimes carry the connotations of, again within quotes, pre-modern in the sense of quote unquote primitive or outdated, many of the traditional sciences and technologies were in fact quite advanced, even by Western standards, as well as better adapted to unique local conditions and needs than their later so called modern substitutes. In countries with ancient cultural traditions, the folk and the elite sciences were taken as part of the same unified legacy without any hegemonic categorization. However, modernization has homogenized various solutions, and this loss of ideas is similar to the destruction of biodiversity. Colonizers systematically derogated, exterminated, or even undermined the local traditional knowledge, technology, and crafts of the lands and people they plundered because of their intellectual arrogance and also to control and appropriate the economic means of production and the social means of organization. Modern societies created hegemonic categories of science versus magic, technology versus superstition, etc. which were arbitrary and contrived. Next slide, please. But many anthropologists who have recently worked with so called primitive people have been surprised to learn of some of their highly evolved and sophisticated technologies. Can we have the next slide, please? The term traditional knowledge system was thus coined by anthropologists as a scientific system which has its own validity in contradistinction to modern science. So the United Nations defines traditional knowledge system as, and I quote, traditional knowledge or local knowledge is a record of human achievement in comprehending the complexities of life and survival in often unfriendly environments. Traditional knowledge, which may be technical, social, organizational, or cultural, was obtained as part of the great human experiment of survival and development. Unquote. Next slide, please. Uh, Laura Nader describes the purpose of studying traditional knowledge systems, TKS, and I quote again, the point is to open up people's mind to other ways of looking and questioning, to change knowledge attitudes, to reframe the organization of science, to formulate a way of thinking globally about traditions. Unquote. So, according to popular and Eurocentric thought, modern science dates back to Newton's time. But we know that a traditional knowledge system dates back to more than 2 million years when Homo habilis started making his tools and interacting with nature. Since the dawn of history, different people have contributed to different branches of science and technology, often in a manner involving interactive contacts across cultures separated by large distances. This interactive influence is becoming clearer as the vast extent of global trade and cultural migration across vast distances is being recognized by researchers. However, we find that generally the history of knowledge, so as to say, as commonly being taught, is almost entirely Eurocentric. It typically consists of two phases. It starts with Greece, neglecting the influences of others upon Greece. Then suddenly it kind of fast forwards many centuries to the Enlightened period around 1500 to claim knowledge as an exclusively European triumph by neglecting the influence of others, especially India, upon the European Renaissance and Enlightenment. The European Dark Ages is presumed to be dark worldwide, when in fact the rest of the world thrived with innovation and prosperity, while Europe was at the peripheries until the conquest of America in 1492. Now, thanks especially to the works of Joseph Needham, China's contribution to global knowledge have recently become known to a wide range of scholars. Even more recently, thanks largely to Arab scholars, the important role of Islamic empires in the transmission of ideas into Europe has become better appreciated. However, in the latter case, many discoveries and innovations of India, as acknowledged by the Arab translators themselves, are often depicted as being of Arab origin, when in fact the Arabs often transmitted what they had learned from India over to Europe. The Indian connections and contributions were largely ignored for a very long period of time. But because it became difficult for the Europeans to ignore the massive archaeological evidence of classical Indian science and technology, they propounded that the Indus civilization had to be a transplant from the Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations. These constructions in historiography have tended to be cumulative rather than reconstructive. That is, more layers were constructed without re examining or corrected prior ones. But hence, also, unfortunately, since independence, there has not been much improvement in such distortions of history, and this has continued to negatively impact the understanding and appreciation of the Indian knowledge system. Many, in even India's intellectual elite, continue to promote the notion that pre-colonial India was feudalistic. Next slide, please. Feudalistic, pre-rational, and by implication, in need of being invaded for its own benefit. This has created a climate in which entrenched prejudice against the Indian knowledge system still persists in contemporary society. For example, according to traditional knowledge system activist Madhu Kiswar, the Indian government today still continues to make many traditional knowledge skills illegal or impossible to practice in our country. Even after independence, many British laws against Indian traditional knowledge system have continued, even though their original intent was to destroy India's massive domestic industry and foreign trade and to replace them with Britain's industrial revolution. Now, it will be very significant here to note that today, less than 10% of India's labor works in the organized sector, that is, as employees of a company. The remaining 90% of India's labor are individual freelancers, contract laborers, private entrepreneurs, and so on, many of whom still practice their traditional trades. However, given the perpetuation of colonial laws that render much of their works illegal, they are highly vulnerable to all sorts of exploitation, corruption, and abuse. The descendants of India's traditional knowledge workers who built massive cities, technologies, and dominated world trade for centuries are today delegitimized in their own country under a democratic government. Many of today's poor jatis and janajatis who performed works in the fields such as textiles, masonry, and metallurgy were at one time the guilds, the old Indian guilds that supplied the whole world with so many and varied industrial items. So, next slide, please. So now we will come to see what was India's contribution to global sciences. So I will consider a few of the topics that I've mentioned and just speak briefly about them. First, coming to civil engineering, the Indus Saraswati civilization was the world's first to build planned towns with underground drainage, civil sanitation, hydraulic engineering, and air cooling architecture. Oven break, oven break bricks were invented in India in approximately 4000 BC. India's indigenous technologies were very sophisticated in design, planning, water supply, traffic flow, natural air conditioning, complex stonework, and even construction engineering. The next would be metal technologies. Now, the ancient Indians pioneered many tools for construction, including the needle with a hole at the pointed end of the needle, the hollow drill, and the true saw. Many of these important tools were subsequently used in the rest of the world centuries later during the Roman times. India again was the first to produce rust-free iron. In the mid-first millennium BC, the Indian Wootz steel was very popular in the Persian ports for making swords. The British sent teams to India to analyze the metallurgical processes that were later appropriated by Britain. Making India's metal works illegal was motivated partly by the goal to industrialize Britain. Now, moving on to textiles, third in the list, India's textile exports were legendary. Roman archives contain official complaints about massive cash drainage because of imports of fine Indian textiles. One of the earliest industries that relocated from India to Britain, of course, forcefully so, was the textile industry. And it became the first major success of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, with Britain replacing India as the world's leading textile exporter. Now, many of the machines built by Britain used Indian designs that had been improved over long periods. Meanwhile, India's textile manufacturers were delicensed, even tortured, in some cases, overtaxed, regulated, and so on and so forth, to so called civilize them into virtual extinction. So I'm sure all of you have heard of the cloth called muslin. So the muslin weavers, makers of the finest cloth, mostly in the present day West Bengal and Bangladesh, which was uh, before independence, United Bengal. So, and muslin is such a fine cloth that even a sari or a bedsheet made of muslin could pass through a ring that we wear in our finger. So these workers were put out of business by the breaking of their looms and the cutting of the thumbs, so that industrially manufactured clothes of inferior quality manufactured by Britain's industry could be sold. And this muslin would not become their competition. Coming to shipping and shipbuilding, India participated in the earliest known ocean-based trading system. Regarding more recent centuries, it has become known to scholars, but it is not so well known to general public, that Vasco da Gama, credited with discovering so many routes in the sea, his ships were navigated by a Gujarati sailor, Kanji Malam, and much of Europe's discovery of navigation was in fact an appropriation of pre-existing navigation in the Indian Ocean that had been a thriving trade system for centuries before Europe or Europeans discovered it. Now, some of the world's largest and most sophisticated ships in ancient times were built in India and China. The compass and other navigation tools were already in use in India at that time. And even the word
Maybe
now,
your program leader knows everything. मैं किसी को कुछ नहीं कहता. लेकिन when
okay, so the word now is the Sanskrit word for boat and is the root word in, as you can see, navigation and navy. Although etymologically, I will not claim that it is entirely a reliable proof of origin. Now, next, coming to water harvesting systems, scientists have estimated that there were 1.3 million man-made water lakes and ponds across India, some as large as 250 square miles. These are now being rediscovered using satellite imagery. These enabled most of the rainwater to be harvested and used for irrigation, drinking, etc., till the following year's rainfall. The village organizations manage these resources at the local level, but the decentralized management system was dismantled during the colonial period when tax collection and cash expropriation and legal enforcements became the primary function of the new governments appointed by the British. Recently, thousands of these talabs, as has been called in local language, have been restored, and this has resulted in a re-emergence of abundant water year-round in many cases. This is a very different approach compared to the massive modern dams built in the name of progress that have devastated the lives of millions, especially the poor and the Adivasis. A point in contention, all of you will remember the Narmada Bachao Andolan and Medha Patkar associated with that. People were agitating against it because although it would serve the industry, it would devastate the lives of the Adivasis living dependent on the rivers. So coming to the next category, forest management. Many interesting findings have recently come out about the way forests and trees were managed by each village and a careful method applied to harvest medicines, firewood, and building material in accordance with natural renewal rates of such plants. So there were no exploitation, they were just not random cutting down plants. They kept in consideration the natural renewal rates of the plants they were cutting down. There is now a database that is being built of these sacred groves across India. Again, it's a story of an economic asset falling into disuse and abuse because of dismantling the local governance and uprooting uh, the respect for traditional systems in general. Now, massive logging, that is log cutting and exporting, massive logging by the British to export India's timber to fund the two world wars and other so-called civilizing programs of their empire are never mentioned even today when scholars try to explain India's current ecological disasters. The local population had been quite sophisticated in managing their ecology until the British came and dismantled our system. Now, coming to farming techniques, uh, India's agricultural production was historically large and sustained a huge population compared to other parts of the world, as we all know. Surpluses were stored for use in a drought year, but the British turned this industry into a cash cow, exporting massive amounts of harvests even during shortages so as to maximize their profit. Now, this caused tens of millions to die of starvation, while at the same time, India's food production was exported at unprecedented rates to the general profit or to generate profit for the British Empire. Now, case to note in this is the infamous Bengal famine in 1943, which was induced by the British. Also, traditional non-chemical based pesticides have recently been revived in India with excellent results, replacing Union Carbide's production in certain markets or products in certain markets. Remember this Union Carbide? This is the same Union Carbide company that was in news for the death of so many lives due to the leakage of MIC or methyl isocyanate gas in Bhopal in 1984. Okay, coming to medicine, traditional medicine. This is now a very well-known and respected field. Much re-legitimizing of Indian medicine has already been done, thanks to many Western labs and scientists. Many multinationals no longer denigrate Indian traditional medicine and have, in fact, been trying to secure patents on Indian medicine without acknowledging the source. Ayurveda is a very good example. Coming to the last, mathematics, logic, and linguistics. Besides other sciences, Indians developed advanced math, including, as we all know, the concept of zero, the base 10 decimal system, now in use worldwide, and many important trigonometry and algebra formulae. They made several astronomical discoveries. Diverse schools of logic and philosophy proliferated in ancient India. India's Panini is acknowledged as the founder of linguistics, and his Sanskrit grammar is still the most complete and sophisticated of any language in the world. I will talk about this in a bit more detail a little later. So it is important to note that amongst all the conquered and colonized civilizations of the old world, India is unique in the following respect. That is, its wealth was industrial and created by its workers, ingenuity, and labor. In all the other instances, such as the Native Americans, the plunder by the colonizers were mainly of land, gold, and natural assets. But in India's case, uh, in addition to the loot of gold and natural assets, the colonizers had a windfall of extraordinary profit margins from control of India's exports, taxation of India's economic production, and eventually the transfer of technology and production to the colonizer's home. This comprised the immense transfer of wealth out of India. Thus, from being the world's major exporting economy, India was reduced to an importer of goods. From being the source of much of the economic capital that funded Britain's industrial revolution, India became one of the biggest debtor nations. From its envied status as the wealthiest nation, Sone ki Chiriya, the golden bird, it became a land synonymous with poverty. And from the nation with a large number of prestigious centers of higher education like Takshashila, Kasmismas, Nalanda, Sharadapeeth, Pushpagiri Vihara, etc., that attracted the cream of foreign students from Eurasia, it became the land with the highest number of illiterate persons. Now, this remains a major untold story. The education system's subversion, the British education system's subversion of India's traditional knowledge system in its history and social studies curricula, which is happening in India also in Indian syllabus, is a major factor for the stereotyping about India. Even when told of these things, few Westerners and many elitist Indians are willing to believe them, as the prejudices about India are too deeply entrenched. And that is very saddening. Indian civilization had always accorded immense importance to knowledge. Can we move on to the next slide, please? A fact that is attested by the amazingly vast body of intellectual texts, the world's largest collection of manuscripts, its attested tradition of text, thinkers, and schools in so many domains of knowledge. Next slide, please. In Srimad Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna tells Arjun that knowledge is the great purifier and liberator of the self. India's knowledge tradition is ancient and uninterrupted, like the flow of the river Ganga, from the Vedas and Upanishads to Sri Aurobindo. Knowledge had always been at the center of all inquiry in the Indian knowledge system. Next slide, please. And it was not only very systematic, but also very well propounded. Yes, thank you. So, three terms are closely connected in all discussions of knowledge, and they are darshana, jnana, and vidya. Darshana, or philosophy, is the system, the point of view which yields or leads to jnana or knowledge. When knowledge gathered about a particular domain is organized and systemized for purposes of, say, reflection and pedagogy, it is called vidya or discipline. Next slide, please. The entire body, next slide, please. The entire body of organized knowledge is divided into two sets in the Mundaka Upanishad, Pars Vidya and Apara Vidya. Knowledge of the ultimate principle, Paramatma or Brahman, that is the metaphysical domain, and knowledge, that is metaphysical knowledge, and knowledge that is secondary to how one grasps Akshara Brahman, that is worldly knowledge. Next slide, please. Accordingly, a distinction is also made between jnana and vijnana, the knowledge of facts of the perceptible world. The first kind of knowledge is observational and is gained by the eyes, etc. The other is experiential and is gained by the inner self or drashta. In one, the whole cognizing self is bahirmukhi, directed towards and involved in the outer world. In the other, the whole cognizing self is antarmukhi, turned inwards. But to acquire the first kind of knowledge, only the sensory apparatus, including the mind, has to be prepared. But to acquire the second kind of knowledge, the knower has to go through a process of preparation called sadhana. The Jaina thought also makes a distinction between pratyaksha jnana, which is knowledge present to the self, atma satiksha, and paroksha jnana, which is present to the senses and the mind, indriya mana satiksha. Next slide, please. Now, see, I don't want to get too technical about all this, and I will continue by saying that over time, knowledge of different domains has been institutionalized into disciplines or vidya and crafts or kala. Indian disciplinary formations include fields as diverse as philosophy, architecture, grammar, mathematics, astronomy, metrics, sociology, economy, polity, ethics, geography, logic, military science, weaponry, you name it and it's there. Metallurgy, shipbuilding, medicine, poetics, biology, and even veterinary science. And this claim is not based on one or two stray books, but for each of these, a continuous and cumulative series of texts continue to be available despite the widespread loss and historically recorded destruction. Now, Indian tradition further mentions 18 major vidyas or theoretical disciplines and 16 kalas, applied or vocational disciplines, crafts. So just to give you the idea, the 18 Vidyas are the four Vedas, the four subsidiary Vedas, Ayurveda, that's medicine, Dhanurveda, that's weaponry, Gandharva Veda, that's music, and Shilpa, that is architecture. Purana, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Dharmasastra, and Vedanga, and the six auxiliary sciences, namely phonetics, grammar, meter, astronomy, ritual, and philology. These form the basis of the 18 sciences in ancient India. So we see that they were not only varied, but there was so much, there's such richness in them. Now, the first thing to note is the constructive dimension of Indian thought. At one time, in its intellectual history, from 1000 BCE to almost 600, the Indian mind, it appears, was deeply immersed in empire building, both of the terra firma and the terra cognita. Few cultures can show such wide ranging structured systems of ideas in almost all spheres of human life as witnessed in India during this phase. This led to the generation of a vast stock of ideas which imprinted itself on the Indian mind, making it naturally reflective and ideational. Now, the ancient in politics, Kautilya, Bhishma, or Vidura, always followed the path of real politics over the political ideologies. However, there were definite principles and theories upon which the foundation of the classical Indian polity was based. The specific Vidya or branch of Indian knowledge system dedicated to the discussion of those principles, theories, and experience based perceptions was called Dandaniti. The other three Vidyas being Anvikshiki, Sai, and Varta. The fourfold division is mentioned in Kautilya's Arthasastra. Each of the Vidyas has one or more lineage of masters who have created multiple schools of thought, thus preserving, expanding, and even proliferating the Indian knowledge system. For Dandaniti, the traditionally celebrated masters or acharyas, as they were called, are Brihaspati, Shukra, Usanas, Bhishma, Kautilya, Kamandaka, to name only a few. Among these masters, Bhishma's teachings throughout the Shanti Parva and the Anushasana Parva of Vyasya's, where Vyasya's Mahabharata stand out as an exhaustive commentary on this unique paradigm of assimilating and practicing power. I will need just 1 minute. Sorry about that. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah, yeah. So uh, it was an exhaustive commentary on this unique paradigm of assimilating and practicing power, politics, and administration. In the extent of its treatment of Dandaniti, it is paralleled only by the Arthasastra. Now, not only in the field of Dandaniti or Rajdharma, but the Indian civilization also had a strong tradition of science and technology. Ancient India was always seen as a land of sages and seers, but believe you me, it was also a land of scholars and scientists. Research has shown that from making the best steel in the world to teaching the world to count, India actively contributed to the field of science and technology. Centuries before modern laboratories were established. Many theories and techniques, next slide please, uh, discovered by the ancient Indians have created and strengthened the fundamentals of modern science and technology. However, can we have the next slide please? However, the vast and significant contributions made by the Indian subcontinent have been long ignored. The British colonizers could never accept the fact that Indians were highly civilized even in the third millennium BCE. Can we? Yes, thank you. So even we were highly qualified and civilized in the third millennium BCE when the British were still in the barbarian stage. Such acknowledgement would destroy the civilizing mission of Europe that provided the intellectual justification for their colonization. British Indologists did not study traditional knowledge systems in India except to quietly document them as systems competing with their own and to facilitate the transfer of technology into Britain's industrial revolution. What was found valuable was quickly appropriated, and its Indian manufacturers were forced out of business. And this was, in many instances, justified as civilizing them. Meanwhile, a new history of India was fabricated to ensure that present and future generations of mentally colonized people would believe in the inferiority of their ancient knowledge and the superiority of the Western modern knowledge. This has been called Machiavellism, named after Lord Macaulay, who successfully championed this colonial strategy in his infamous Minutes of 1835, and very successfully dismantled not only the Indian system of education in the native languages through its pathshalas, tolls, madrasas, and maktabs, but also the ancient indigenous wisdom and pride associated with them. That concludes the first part of the major part of my talk. I'll move on to the second part. And can we have the next slide, please? I'll begin the second part of my talk by saying that the time has come to reverse all that. But it would be wrong to suddenly and completely discard the present system and go back to the old system. That would be a sure recipe for disaster. So we need to incorporate elements of the Indian knowledge system into our present system of education in a systematic and phased manner. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And the NEP 2020 aspires to do exactly that. The NEP 2020, or the National Education Policy 2020, recognizes this rich heritage of ancient and eternal Indian knowledge and thought as a guiding principle. The Indian knowledge system comprises of Jnana, Vijnana, and Jivan Darshana that have evolved out of experience, observation, experimentation, and rigorous analysis. This tradition of validating and putting into practice has impacted our education, arts, administration, law, health, justice, manufacturing, and even commerce. This has influenced classical and other languages of India, which were transmitted through textual, oral, and artistic traditions. It includes knowledge from ancient India and its successes and challenges, and a sense of India's future aspirations specific to education, health, environment, and indeed all aspects of life. Now, the objectives of incorporating the Indian knowledge system into our present day education is that it aims to support. Please move on to the next slide. It supports and is to support and facilitate further research to solve the contemporary societal issues in several fields such as holistic health, psychology, neuroscience, nature, environment, and sustainable development. The primary aim of drawing from the past and integration of the Indian knowledge system is to solve the contemporary and emerging problems of India and world by using our ancient knowledge systems represented by uninterrupted tradition of knowledge transfer and unique point of Bharatiya Drishti. Now, to this effect, the IKS cell, or the Indian Knowledge System cell, is an innovation or an innovative cell under the Ministry of Education MOE at AICT New Delhi. It is established to promote interdisciplinary research on all aspects of IKS, preserve and disseminate IKS and further research and societal applications. It will actively engage, next slide please, for spreading the rich heritage of our country and traditional knowledge in the fields of arts, literature, agriculture, basic sciences, and so on and so forth. Now, the functions of this IKS division is first of all to facilitate and coordinate IKS based or related inter and transdisciplinary work done by various institutions in India and abroad, including universities, institutions of national importance, research and development laboratories, and different ministries, and inspire private sector organizations to engage with it. The other important function is to establish, guide, and monitor subject-wise interdisciplinary research groups comprising of researchers from institutes, centers, and even individuals. Also, to create and promote popularization schemes to facilitate funding of various projects and develop mechanisms to undertake research and to make policy recommendations. Please move on to the next slide. Whenever required for the promotion of IKS. Now, the vision of IKS is very simple. The vision of IKS is to promote interdisciplinary research on all aspects of Indian knowledge system, preserve and disseminate Indian knowledge system for further research and societal applications. Coming to the mission, next slide please. Coming to the mission of IKS, there are many things. There are 10 missions, 10 major missions. The first is to create a database of individuals and organizations who have contributed by way of research, teaching, publication, and preservation of ancient and contemporary rich Indian knowledge systems ranging from all across the all subjects, all across the disciplines. The second is to create a portal for archival and dissemination of this rich knowledge, and to also create an open portal and keep it dynamic and live like Wikipedia in a PPT model. The third is to promote and enable further research to address the societal challenges faced today in several areas, including holistic health, psychology, neurosciences, and so on and so forth. The fourth is to identify scholars and institutions who have worked in various areas of IKS and to integrate their work and to categorize the major areas. The fifth would be to get reports of work done by all people who have contributed to IKS and bring out regular publications. The sixth would be to promote research in IKS for providing proof of concepts, new knowledge generation, effective interdisciplinary work useful for society. The seventh is to create research fellowship or fellowships of visiting professors, scientists, and scholars, and to promote interdisciplinarity, like appointing Sanskrit professors in IITs, IIMs, and so on and so forth, and appointing professors of science and technology in humanities teaching and language teaching universities. The eighth would be to suggest measures to integrate IKS in textbooks and reference books of modern disciplines of knowledge offered at school and higher education. The ninth would be to initiate collaboration or coordination between institutions under the Ministry of Education, other ministries, departments, and independent scholars, NGOs and private institutions working in the field of IKS to promote interdisciplinary research involving modern streams and ancient shastras can also be done. And the last is, can we move on to the next slide? The last of the 10th is to constitute expert groups and committees to plan, execute, and oversee the objectives of the IKS division and to take up any step, work, project, or activity to further the cause of IKS. Now, the aim of promoting Indian knowledge system is not to keep it confined to the STEM subjects only, but to include humanities, medicine, agriculture, community knowledge systems, fine and performing arts, vocational skills, and all subjects which have IKS contents. As per the guidelines, the courses must have a clear mapping of the traditional subjects in IKS with the modern subjects such as chemistry, mathematics, physics, agriculture, and so on and so forth. The final objective is the introduction of Indian knowledge system in schools and higher education curricula in a well-planned, systematic, topical, and sustainable way. The IKS will include tribal knowledge as well as indigenous and traditional learning methods, which will cover and include mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and other subjects. Now, specific courses in tribal ethno-medicinal practices, forest management, traditional organic crop cultivation, natural farming, etc., will also be made available. An engaging course on Indian knowledge systems will also be available to students in secondary schools as an elective. The policy recognizes that the knowledge of the rich diversity of India should be imbibed firsthand by learners. This should include simple activities such as students' tours to various regions of the country. This will not only promote tourism, but also help uh, in developing an awareness and appreciation of India's diversity, culture, and traditions, as well as knowledge of various parts of the nation. Towards this or for this, under Ek Bharat Shrestha Bharat, 100 tourist destinations in our country will be identified where educational institutions will send students to study these destinations and their history, scientific contribution, traditions, indigenous literature, and knowledge, etc., as part of augmenting their knowledge about these areas. At present, 32 IKS centers have been established to catalyze original research, education, ongoing 75 high-end interdisciplinary research facilities like metallurgy, ancient town planning, and water resource management, etc. Projects are being put in place. Around 5,200 internships on IKS have been offered, and more than 50 faculty level development programs and national international conferences and workshops have been conducted. More than 8,000 higher education institutes have started adopting IKS in their curriculum and have worked on digitization of 1.5 lakh books. The IKS division has brought together leading thinkers and practitioners of various knowledge domains to develop Vision 2047, documenting a roadmap for establishing a thriving Bharatiya Gyan Parampara. By drawing from our vast knowledge, it would be easier to promote and enable further research to address the challenges of our present times. Next slide, please. Inclusion of these courses in the mainstream education would provide, uh, excuse me, inclusion of these courses would provide inspiration while preserving the heritage of our learning systems. Through exposure to both traditional and contemporary concepts, students can gain a better understanding of their culture, expand their intellectual development, and enhance their confidence. Now, the government of India has issued very specific guidelines on the 13th of June 2023 for incorporating Indian knowledge in higher education curriculum. So, as you can see from the list, since I think I am running short of time, I will not go uh, into the details of each criteria, but I will just point out a few. So, it has made provisions for mandatory credit component, meaning that universities must introduce learner credits on or IKS electives in all courses for imbibing learners across all disciplines with traditional knowledge and pride. After UGC made it mandatory to include 5% of the total credits in a curriculum related to IKS courses, the AICTE has now introduced IKS courses for the first year students in engineering colleges as well. And the other important thing is that it has mandated that students enrolled in UG and PG programs should be encouraged to take a credit course in IKS amounting to at least 5% of the total mandated credits. Students may take more, but that is the minimum. At least 50% of the credits apportioned to the IKS should be related to the major discipline, and the medium of instruction for the IKS courses could be any of the Indian languages. So these are am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So whereby existing IKS courses may be synced to digital learning platforms like Swayam and NPTEL via ODL for learners across geographies. So this is, I will not elaborate since I have to finish and I will just move on. I'll just talk about one more thing. It attempts, these government directives attempts to provide employment opportunities for youth through skill-based IKS programs, such as Ayurveda-based dietitian programs, Gandha Shastra-based perfumery programs, among many uniquely IKS-based skills. So, uh, with this, I will move on to the third and the final part of my talk. And can I have the next slide, please? So this part will be how IKS may be utilized to teach English in Indian classrooms. So for this, let us begin by saying that though English is a world language and may act as the window to the world knowledge, we should not think or feel that our Indian languages are in any way inferior to it, except perhaps for the fact that they do not enjoy as much currency in the whole world as English does. But as a language, our traditional languages have a system that is far more structured and layered than even English. We must understand that as far as the concept of language in our ancient Indian tradition is concerned, we find that there are three categories to it. It is not just for communication. The first is that language is a speech. The second is that language is cognition, not communicative only. And the third is that language is a constructive system. So again, we find that the kind of elaborate language system that was described by the ancient Indian grammarian, next slide please, Panini, is not found even in the Western education system. The linguistic science of the celebrated Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure or Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development and epistemological view, or even Noam Chomsky's theory of language acquisition are all 20th century phenomena. While in the 5th, 6th century BC, Panini wrote his Astadahi, 8 chapters, a linguistic text that set the standards for how Sanskrit was meant to be written and spoken. Next slide, please. Now coming to literature, English literature, I mean, how to use IKS to teach English literature in Indian classrooms. Now here I'll talk a little bit from my personal experience. If we look at the syllabus of the English honors course, after the introduction of CBCS, that choice-based credit system, for the colleges affiliated to Kolkata University, where I teach, Calcutta University, sorry, where I teach, we will find a very big problem. We'll see a very big problem. And I can show you what the solution can be. So after the CBCS was introduced, there were two core papers. The first semester began with two core courses, CC1 and CC2. Now, while CC1, core course 1 had history of English literature and philology, core course 2 or CC2 had European classical literature with texts like Homer's Iliad, Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, selected portions from Ovid's Metamorphoses, Plautus's Pot of Gold, and a few things from Horace's Satires. Now, the thing is that while history of literature and philology should be taught to students at the inception, but why European classical literature in the first semester? That is my question. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with teaching Homer, Sophocles, Ovid, Plautus, or Horace to students of English literature. But what I'm contending is that it could and should be done later. My belief is that for students of English literature in India, we could and should begin with Indian writers who write in English. For instance, authors like Rabindranath Tagore, Toru Dutt, Mulk Rajanand, R.K. Narayan, Raja Rao, and even Sri Aurobindo. This will not only introduce the students to the Indian way of writing English, Indian English as we call it, but also to the Indian society, ethos, and value system. As Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan had said, that the Gita and the Gitanjali are the two cornerstones of Indian culture. Now, so I feel that the students should also be taught excerpts from these two texts to teach them about Indian ethos. And it is only after this, when they have grasped our traditional concepts and have developed a sense of pride in their own culture, we can move on to the teachings of the British writers and even European classical literature. It should not be the other way around. So, next slide, please. Also, in the popular literature paper, we should even teach the Panchatantra alongside the Tintin comics that are already in the syllabus. Now, just to give an example of how to begin with a text written by an Indian author that is replete with Indian knowledge and references to British writers, so that the students can place the text in their own cultural context and then smoothly transition to the British writers in a very natural progression. We might cite the example of the novel The Cat and Shakespeare by Raja Rao. The Cat and Shakespeare, as described by Rao himself, is a metaphysical comedy. It clearly shows a very strong formal Upanishadic influence. The spiritual experiences of its narrator, Ramakrishna Pai, are reminiscent of the illuminative passages in the Chandra Yoga Upanishad that describes the experience of the infinite. The dialogues in the novel are also Upanishadic in their question and answer pattern. The best example is the conversation between Govindan Nair and Lakshmi in the brothel. Nayar's metaphysical speculation, such as, and I quote, is there seeing first or the object first, unquote, seems to be modeled on the philosophical queries in the Upanishads. Our students are not familiar with the existence of this speculation in our Indian philosophy, though they are all familiar with Descartes' principle, within quotes, I think, therefore I am. Next slide, please. Anyhow, the cat links the novel to the beast. Yes, the cat links the novel to the Indian beast fable, and Nayar's comic roguery shows similarities to the rogue fable in the Panchatantra. The major Western debt of this novel is to Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, who is acknowledged in the very title. Shakespeare, of course, is a symbol for the universal, and according to Rao, Shakespeare's vision transcends duality and arrives at an unified view of the universe. Next slide, please. There are numerous allusions to Shakespeare's play in this novel, plays like Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, culminating in the rat trap episode or the mouse trap episode, in which a cat is trapped in a large rat trap. This prompts Nair to develop or to deliver a parody of Hamlet that begins, and I quote, a kitten sans cat, that is the question, unquote, echoing the original from Hamlet, within quotes, to be or not to be, that is the question. Now, and next slide, please. The Cat and Shakespeare is Rao's sequel to The Serpent and the Rope. Uh, in that, it shows what happens after a seeker's veil of illusion has been removed by the guru. Its theme may be summed up in Hamlet's words to Horatio towards the end of the play. And I quote again, there's a divinity that shapes our ends. Rough hew them how we will, unquote. Next slide, please. A similar view of grace is embodied in the novel in what Nair, the man who is united to truth, calls as the way of the cat. The way of the cat is simply put the notion that just as the kitten is carried by the scruff of the neck by the mother cat, as you can see in the picture, the human being is completely at the mercy of the divine. Consequently, the only way to live is to surrender oneself totally to divine grace, as the helpless kitten surrenders itself to the mother cat. A more poignant echo of this may be found in the lines from another of Shakespeare's plays, King Lear, where Gloucester says, and I quote again, as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods. They kill us for their sport, unquote. Anyhow, Nair lives this philosophy of the cat and is responsible for teaching it to his ignorant neighbor, the narrator Pai. Now, Pai is like the innocent hunter in the story, as you can see from the picture, the second picture, who unknowingly hit leads on Lord Shiva and was subsequently rewarded with a vision. And this story could be used as a very good introductory point to start the teachings of John Milton, who in his poem on his blindness had said a very similar thing. And I quote again, they also serve to stand and be, unquote. And next slide. To conclude, I think this is how IKS can be used to teach English literature in Indian classrooms. Thank you all for your patient hearing and for bearing with me for so long. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Banerjee. This was really very illuminating, and the simplicity of your presentation, I'm sure, made it very, very simple and clear for my students and all those who are participating in this session. And I wish that one of us also starts writing on similar trends, not quoting Milton or Shakespeare, but quoting Tulsidas and Valmiki. And that would be a narrative and a piece of literature that will conjoin our students to Indian knowledge systems along with literature knowledge. So thank you so much, and it was a wonderful session.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Pratyasha and Shreya, please
Thank you
continue
so
with the
much, sir.
session.
Thank you so much, sir. We are truly thankful for the knowledge imparted in today's lecture. Sir, your expertise and clarity have greatly enriched our understanding of the subject. Thank you, everyone, for being such patient and attentive listeners throughout the session. As we come to the end of this session, I would like to encourage you all to ask any questions you have related to the topic.
Yes, Naina, unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, can you pinpoint some important ancient Indian writers who need to be inculcated?
Naina, you are not audible.
I cannot hear you properly.
Please write your question in the chat box.
Sir, could you please?
Yes, continue.
Sir, I am audible.
Oh, are you asking
Sir, could you
who are
please
the ancient
pinpoint?
Indian writers who should be included in the text, included in the syllabus?
Yes, sir.
Is
Some
that your question?
ancient writers. So to make the
No, see,
yes, sir.
see, this is not like I would not take names, and this is not like one size fits all. This is not a free size kind of a showroom. It is not like that. Which authors should be, or which writers, or which philosophers, or which thinkers should be kind of included in the curriculum and the syllabi. So it is like, as I told you, uh, what I had said in the initial part of the talk was that we need decentralization. We need decentralization. Okay, I'll tell you. Just to give you an example of my home state, Bengal, where I was born and where I teach, we have so much of history in Bengal. And so when we are decentralizing the history and when we're writing the local histories, we are writing the histories of even the Santals, but not the Gorkhas or the Nepalis. So the people from Darjeeling, they have started saying, sir, where are we in Bengal? Why isn't our history being recorded? So it is not a question of which ancient writer should be included for all states or for all across India. You just as I said that while teaching this concept of just do your work, you'll be rewarded. So in this case, that story of the ancient person the story of the hunter who heaped Billa Patra leaves on Shiva without knowing that he was doing so. So, and he was rewarded. So Milton echoes that. So when you introduce a story, when you're introducing Milton, my contention is that tell them the story that we have in Indian mythology or Indian Panchatantras and other things. And so you get the concept, you get the philosophy, and then tell them that we already have that philosophy. And on this philosophy, Milton has also written a poem which is on his blindness. So that is what I'm propagating. I am not advocating, I'm not taking a commission for naming authors, philosophers, or people who should be in the syllabus. Get my point? I hope that answers your question. That answers your question.
Yes, Vani, you can ask the question,
Yes,
unmute
ma'am.
yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Sir, my question is that what are some key characteristics of IKS that differentiate them from WKS?
As in, could you elaborate a little?
Sir, what are some key characteristics of IKS that differentiate them from Western knowledge system?
No, Western. It is. We are talking about. We are saying IKS, but what we mean by IKS is Indian traditional knowledge system. There is a present modern day Indian knowledge system and a present day Western knowledge system. So if you are referring to Western knowledge system and Indian knowledge system in the contemporary world, you know the differences. But I presume, I understand that you are trying to say what is the difference between the traditional Indian knowledge system uh, and the facets of the Western traditional knowledge system. Is that what you are saying?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And you are a student of which discipline?
Sir, English.
Okay. So I'm very sure that you have studied the history of England, the political history of England, or the formation history of the formation of England. So, since you are a student from the English discipline, let me tell you, when did the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes come to England from the neighboring regions, and when did English as a language flourish, and what kind of or what was the date? Well, I mean, talk of Beowulf. When was it composed? By the time Beowulf was composed, by the time Owl and the Nightingale was being composed, we already had our epics, didn't we? And not only at that time, or not only just before that, ages before that. So, I mean, there's no comparison. The difference between the traditional Western knowledge system and the traditional Indian knowledge system is that the Indian knowledge system was a right fruit when the Western knowledge system did not exist. Get my point?
Yes, sir.
And
Yes, sir.
when Chaucer started writing, which century was that? We had so many writers before that. The 13th,
Yes.
14th century, that's where English literature started, whereas our Indian literature started way back 2 million years ago. The Rig Veda, the Vedas, then Rasmuni, then Tulsidas, then Valmiki, so many, Gita, Mahabharata. So we were the
I have
precursors of literature, Western literature.
I have given you the list of the authors and the people. I have actually talked about Panini since I am also from the English department. So I've given you. I mean, that is the kind of structure in language and literature that we have. So you can imagine. But the major difference, as I told you, is that there was no traditional Western knowledge system when we had our traditional Indian knowledge system. That I think settles the score.
Yes, Arya.
Good afternoon, sir. So the session was wonderful. So I wanted to ask that what is the relevance of Indian knowledge system in today's age of internet? Like how the system can help the students of our generation who are living in the era of social media and our attention span is also decreasing day by day. So how the system can be helpful in that?
Yes. So see, the first thing that I'd like to tell you is that we are living in an age where we have a surfeit of information. When I was young, long time back, okay, so we had to wait the whole day for the 7:30 Bengali news and the 9 o'clock English news, and there was the Hindi news at 8:30. I forgot the time. Those were the two I was like following rigorously to get to know of the day's events, what happened anywhere in the world. But now, what is happening is that you have information and a surfeit of information at the tip of your hand. Everybody has an Android phone. Sorry, even maybe an iPhone. Okay, so what you get my point. So the thing is that we have so much of information now that filtering becomes a problem. So we have so much information, tathya, that I think that the Indian adage of tatham eva jayati should be tatham eva jayati can be changed to tatham eva jayati. The more information you have, the more authentic or relevant the things kind of seem. But you have to filter. So for the young people, they have every bit of information, good, bad, negative, made up. You know what deepfake is doing these days. So the youngsters involved in the social media, they need to have a very strong sense of being able to filter. Like Ramakrishna Paramahansa was called the Paramahansa because if you mix, like the duck can separate milk from the water and drink it. Paramahansa Ramakrishna Paramahansa was also believed to be able to drink a drink in which a poison was mixed and the poison would just stay at the bottom like the dregs of the tea. So that is what we are supposed to do, youngsters are supposed to do, but it is easier said than done. Now, how does IKS come into this? One thing is that, look, when you know your culture, when you're rooted in your traditions, when you respect your culture, when you know your culture, respect it, when you know your traditions, and you know that you have a fallback thing, that we are not floating like algae or other viruses, but we are like banyan trees who are deep rooted. So there's no problem in taking advantage of the modern inventions in science and technology. You can go for social media like Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, X handle, or whatever it is. I am not even ruling out dating sites. Even they are fine. But the moment you have that cultural and traditional learning in you, when you know where we come from, you know the value system of our ancient people, what will happen is that you'll be able to enjoy all that without the fear of going astray. And remember, Sanskrit is or has been declared as one of the most scientific languages that can be used for computer coding. It's a pity that we are not promoting that. You go to anywhere outside the world, you will find that there are computer cyber cafes which allow you to send emails in Chinese language, even nowadays in Korean language. But I haven't come across any cyber cafe, even in India, which will allow me to mail in Bengali or Hindi. Yes, you have a special app that is coming up, but you have to carry that app or you have to have that app installed. It is not by default. So there IKS can come in. When you realize, when you recognize your tradition, culture, have respect for it, then even in the modern world, you can develop an app in which or through which you can translate Sanskrit slokas into simple languages that are understandable, maybe Bengali, maybe Hindi, maybe Gujarati, so that people will be, interested, and they will get access to the Sanskrit slokas and the wisdom hidden in them. So that is how I feel we should go about. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, one last
Ma'am, you are
question.
muted.
Artificial intelligence is a great translator also. It has so many softwares that translate your work into so many languages. So the knowledge that you are trying to, share will get translated over. You need to
Yes, but
learn
one
how to
word of
work.
advice: do not use AI to write your answers or turn in your thesis, because we have ways of catching you, and even if you humanize it, we still know how to catch you.
No, no.
So that is a
We
simple
must
thing.
use,
That is a simple thing. Yes.
we have to use it with a lot of intelligence because we use those software for the benefit, not for intruding on our
Yes.
privacy or not
Exactly.
using your analytical skills.
Okay, one last question by Priyansh Datta Roy. Priyansh, unmute yourself. Yes, Priyansh, please speak. Priyansh, you are
I
not
cannot hear
audible.
him. Can you hear him?
No, sir. Or you can write it in the chat box.
Pratyasha, please switch on your camera.
Is he writing? Can someone please read out his question?
Priyansh, please write it in the chat box, your question. You're not audible. Maybe there is some technical error.
हेलो हाँ हाँ बताइए हाँ 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 कंफर्म है मैंने मेल भेजा है हाँ मेल भेजा है मैंने हाँ हाँ
Teacher Verma, please switch off your phone and mic.
दोबारा से मेल वही आगे फॉरवर्ड कर दे दोबारा से
Teacher Verma, please switch off.
He has been
So we
muted.
Can someone can someone
Okay,
please help
sir.
me? Has Priyansh written this question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. He has written the
Yeah,
question.
okay.
So, how can we as students counter certain narratives that seek to undermine the Indian knowledge system as a relevant pedagogy?
Just once more, please. How can we counter
How can we as students counter certain
uh,
narratives that seek to
certain
undermine
narratives?
the Indian knowledge system as a relevant pedagogy?
Okay. So see, students have a lot of power, and students are the harbingers of change. If you have followed what happened in Bangladesh with the quota system and all, so students have a lot of power. Don't think that we are students. How can we counter or how can we challenge the system? Our teachers are going to teach us, and we're going to learn from them. How can we say that no, sir or ma'am, whatever you are saying is not right? Yeah, I have read this, I have read that, and that is more correct. So first of all, let me warn you that bias either way is wrong. So if you are biased that the Indian traditional knowledge system is worthless, that is wrong. If you are biased that the Indian traditional knowledge system is the ultimate thing, then you are wrong. You know, in recent times, we have such a rich culture and heritage, and we have so much of scientific inventions and linguistic theories, and we have our epics and all. So much in our traditional systems by the ancient people, but we have become a laughing stock in front of the world. Sometimes we become so because of the dubious and the spurious claims by certain people, mostly political, who say such things, who claim such atrocious things and technologies that were existent in ancient India, which cannot be scientifically proved. So, as students, your way of countering these kind of questions that undermine Indian traditional Indian knowledge system is to read up. I can guarantee you that English students of English literature across the country have all been advised to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, although they are not in the syllabus. How many of you have read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata? Even in the English translation, I'm not asking you to read the original. Even in the English translation, none. I'm very sure you have read only a children's version or maybe seen it on TV during the lockdown when Ramanand Sagar's Ramayana was being repeat telecast. So the best way to counter is to read, to study, to get to know it. Don't just pick up excerpts from the internet or read comments or articles that are on the social media. No. Of course, use your internet. Of course, use your AI. Of course, use your other mechanisms, the LinkedIn and the other digital libraries that you have. Okay. So use those to read about those things. Read about the traditional Indian knowledge system, the ancient Indian wisdom. Form your ideas. Then sound them out with your teachers. If you have read something, maybe you have read something in Mahabharata which has a resonance with teachers' poetry. Discuss it with your peers. Discuss it with your teachers. Take it up with them. Maybe he or she has not your teacher has also not thought about that. Think it together. Form a good idea. Have the references ready. That's where you can counter. You just cannot say, no, what you're saying is wrong. Indian traditional knowledge is better than Danish knowledge because one day in Facebook I wrote that I read a comment which said this. No, not that way. If you are saying something from the Indian knowledge system, countering the Western knowledge system, you must have a ready reference. From where are you quoting? Which book? Which edition? Which page? So, thorough knowledge about anything. Read, read, read. That is the only thing. Reading
Yes,
is what will make you.
Dr. Sourav, you will be happy to know when we have established our Center of Excellence in Indian Knowledge Systems, and all our students are advised topics on the Indian knowledge systems and the Indian narrative in the past ancient history of India for their research papers. And almost 60% of our students, say about 20 to 30 in each semester, have worked on topics and they got published also in a comparative note. And our PhD scholars are working on that. There are 3 PhD scholars who are working. One is working on the ecofeminism in Ramayana, and one is working on uh, Gorakhnath sect and well-being and happiness. One is, so we started it 2, 3 years back, and then the NEP brought it. So I was very really struck down because I always talked of our students not to only quote Western theories and philosophies. We have more
Yes.
integrated philosophies. And don't talk of just Greek philosophies. A lot of Greek philosophers have borrowed from our Indian philosophers.
Yes.
And now
I just mentioned that in my paper.
Yeah, so I'm so happy when I found that this has come in NEP 2020 because if it is Bharat ka Amritsar, we must drive a pride that all these, philosophies, theories, criticisms came from our subcontinent. And the Britishers tried to undermine it because they did not want to give that place of acceptance of accepting that there can be anyone more intelligent than us. Basically, it was that. So it was a very good thing that NEP 20.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. That's wonderful to hear, and it's a great initiative. All the best. I hope it carries on in the future and becomes a great center for learning of IKS.
And our next program that we are having is the Rasmuni Natyashala and the change in teaching pedagogy as suggested by NEP 2020. We have a very active theatre at Amity School of Languages, and under IKS now we are working only on Natyashala, Rasmuni, and performing arts as a pedagogy for students to learn more. So we will invite you to join online. You can join online to this. We have a 7-day seminar, some workshops, some production. Students who will join, and you can see it. And then I would love to get your comments on it at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Satyasha? Yes, please end this session.
Are there any more questions?
Session now, as there is a meeting.
Please proceed ahead if there are no questions.
If there are no other questions, we will proceed to the final segment of the session. Thank you all for joining for today. Hope to see you all tomorrow for a session by Dr. Suparna Bhattacharya on the topic Rereading Regional Fairy Tales of India, Fostering Self-Awareness and Enhancing Essential Life Skills. Please don't forget to fill up the feedback form and complete the assignment within the 24 hours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.